Welcome, everybody, as you're coming into the webinar, Reimagining Learning for Middle School. Now, it takes a little bit from wherever you're joining to get everybody joined in. My name is Margie Dohorst, and I'm going to be your moderator for this workshop tonight. And I'm a facilitator for the Center for Responsive Schools, both on a part-time per diem basis, working with schools year-round. And then also I work in the programs department as a curriculum and instructional designer. I'm joining you from Wisconsin, where I was an elementary principal, as well as a special educator in speech and language, and also as a gifted and talented educator. So I'm excited to be joined tonight with three amazing panelists who you're going to hear from the most, but want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to build a small community tonight. So as we build this community, take a look at the message and add to the chat feature a little bit about yourself, especially where you're joining us from. Hey, Joe, glad you're joining us from Nashville. Oakland, California. You might know our friend who's also from California. Lindsay is from Indianapolis. Another California person. Tina, thanks for joining from Ohio. Beverly, your experience as a school counselor, I'm sure, is just so beneficial right now as we start talking tonight. In Nevada City, California. Don't know where that one is. Well, as we see a diversity in the attendees tonight, just appreciate you all for what you do for students, and also taking the time tonight to think of some other ways that you can even support your students more, knowing that learning has changed so much over the last couple of years, as has teaching. So the teachers that are sharing with you tonight are going to share what they've noticed about their middle school learners. And then they'll also be sharing with us how they've reimagined that based on learning for their students as teachers. To get us started tonight is just a couple things I'm going to share with you. This is a webinar format and not a Zoom meeting. So in this case, you'll see the 4 participants, but you won't in your gallery view get a chance to see, I'm sorry, the 3 panelists and myself, but you won't have a chance to see the other participants or be in breakout rooms. So we're going to interact with you as we do in Responsive Classroom through the Q&A feature. You can ask a question at any time. It might be about logistics, or it could be a specific question for the panelists. If we're able to answer it at that moment, we will, maybe through that Q&A feature or out loud to the group. And we'll save a little extra time at the end if there's additional questions that we haven't gotten to. In addition, to make this interactive, we're going to ask you to contribute at times to the chat feature. And you can do that to everyone in the group, make that a positive comment or a connection. And as we do that, you know the importance of social interaction. It's really difficult in a webinar, but we're going to try to build that in as much as we can. Bandwidth is always a challenge, especially where you're joining from. If it's evening time, more computers and more bandwidth is being taken. So if you are using a computer that has some weak signal, close your other programs and make sure that you're able to maximize as much as you can. If there's a direct connection, that sometimes helps. Ask other people to get off the Wi-Fi if that helps. And if you do get kicked out or if you're lagging, exit and re-enter and we'll let you back in. In addition, this free webinar is provided to you tonight live, but it also will be recorded. Those of you that signed up will get the recording emailed to you in just a few days. It also will live on our organization's YouTube page, and you can search that. Like if you end up today saying, oh, watch for this webinar on Responsive Classroom's YouTube page, and you can get a little bit more information there, as well as other recordings of previous webinars. And I'm going to now step back and have you get a chance to meet our panelists. So I told you a little bit about myself. Our 3 panelists are Christine, Heather, and Linda. Each of them will tell you a little bit about themselves. And I'm excited to say, I know, and I've worked with all of them through our work with the Center for Responsive Schools. We're all facilitators for Responsive Classroom. So I'll start with Christine. Christine, joining us from Arizona. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Diaz, and I'm in my 28th year of teaching. and I am currently a reading interventionist for 7th and 8th graders at a junior high just outside of Phoenix. I have mixed ages, so I have anywhere from 11 to 15-year-olds in my classroom setting, so that's always fun to have that wide range, and definitely get to experience all the joys and challenges that middle schoolers bring. I am coming to you from my home, and I do want to share that I have 2 dogs that have not gotten a lot of attention today, so they are sometimes barking. So if I'm in the middle of talking and I mute myself, it's because they're being very loud. So looking forward to a great evening tonight.
So they just need some love. Yes, sweet puppies. And also joining us from Minneapolis is Heather Young. Heather, tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Heather Young, and this is my 11th year teaching. I'm a 7th grade social studies teacher in a suburb of Minneapolis. And prior to that, I taught 6th grade reading for many years. And I've been using Responsive Classroom for a while, and just seeing so much impact in the students every day. I'm going to also give a caveat like Christine did. I'm one of those people with connection issues tonight. So if I just all of a sudden freeze, I appreciate your grace and understanding, since we all have experience with that over the last year. So thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Heather. And Heather is one of our contributing authors. I just want to share that to Empowering Educators. It's a new series of books that's out for the middle school voice. And Christine is also an author of 2 blog articles that she'll talk a little bit about some of those tools that she's been using, but I encourage you as they come out in November to get a look at those as well. And another contributing author to Empowering Educators is my colleague, Linda Berger. Linda's joining us from Santa Clara, California.
As I look out and see the sunny skies, I feel like saying good evening, good afternoon, one of them. Happy to be here and thrilled that you've come and to join us in with this important work. I am currently a 4th grade teacher in Santa Clara. I've taught K through 5, along with a year of 6th grade, and I always say, and some high school thrown in just for fun. That's been a really exciting time for me, and this is really challenging us in a good way. Somebody said, told me recently, innovation never happens when you do it right the first time. So in having the goal of being an innovative educator, I am kind to myself with those mistakes that are happening. I have 2 20-something children now, both just recent college graduates, and I'm always super excited to kind of RC them at home in order to really practice what we can do with middle schools, because there's so much going on out there that we can always learn. And I'm so excited to be able to share some of those ideas with you tonight.
It's interesting, as we're all facilitators for Responsive Classroom and teachers, as we talk about this and are seeing them, Linda was like a cute way to describe that. It becomes after a while that Responsive Classroom isn't what you do, it's how you do a lot of different things. So if you're joining us and you're familiar with Responsive Classroom, we welcome you back and hope you're seeing some familiar faces. And if this is new to you, know that this is for everybody. So we're glad that you're here. We're all kind of in that same boat of making the best of a challenging situation right now with the work that's going on in schools as a result of a worldwide health crisis. So we think back to our time in the last couple of years, and I think somewhat those years now kind of seem normal, which isn't good. But when I started thinking about our middle school students, those 11 to 14-year-olds, if we just take 5th graders, usually that youngest age of middle school, their last normal year of school wasn't last year when they were 4th grade, and it was completely interrupted when they were 3rd grade. So really their last full year of academic and social emotional learning was in 2nd grade. So we've tried our best as educators to close that academic gap in whatever way possible: hybrid, virtual, in-person, and safe. And we're still in a worldwide pandemic. So the expertise of our 3 panelists tonight is going to help us know what they've done and maybe what they've learned from colleagues, and knowing kind of what Linda said, we learn from our mistakes too. So you might hear them say, yeah, I tried this and it didn't work, to help us feel, first of all, we're all in the same boat. And the second thing is that we can lean on each other. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and again, use the chat or the Q&A feature to help out as well with any thoughts that you have. So my first question for our panelists is, as middle school educators, what have you personally noticed has been the impact on your students? I know this is kind of hard to say generally, but socially, emotionally, and academically. And I was just doing the math, and it's not 18 months, it's now 20 months of being in a global pandemic. Christine, would you start sharing?
Sure. Thanks, Margie. Well, yeah, wow. And we've all had like really unique settings. And each of those unique settings kind of allowed our students to gain some skills and lose some skills along the way that they might have had in place or were just about to learn. I think that whole uncertainty, are we in person? Are we virtual? Am I wearing my mask today or not? It has led to an increased level of anxiety in our students and also in us as educators. And I think it's important for us to all recognize that we are doing our best and take time to validate those efforts towards growth. You know, being mindful when our students are showing anxiety and reminding them, hey, you know how to do this. We've been practicing this. You've got this. And so having those predictable routines in place, using interactive modeling can really lower that anxiety. And I'd also say that since we've been in this pandemic, those adverse childhood experiences now really pertain and apply to every single student. Every single student in this world has witnessed and experienced some of those triggers that lead to toxic stress. And so we're seeing those manifest in our classrooms in behaviors that might be withdrawn or really overt. They might seem timid, they might seem anxious, or they might seem overly competent and confident. So it's definitely been an interesting time and really an opportunity to look at, even when we think about our competencies, you know, our students used to be competent in these areas of responsibility, but now with the world looking at it differently, maybe we need to do some new practice because they have that foundation 2 years ago that we can build on. We just want to kind of bring it back around to a more developmentally appropriate space.
Heather, that was Christine. That was so well said. And that reminder that the impact has had an impact on the brain, basically. And if you read any of our chapters, especially in our 2 latest books about toxic stress, so the book for middle school is called Seeing the Good in Children. There's a whole chapter on that impact. And we know that toxic stress, so those adverse childhood experiences, impact learning, and they impact how students respond to typical situations. But the students that we've been experiencing now have also dealt with fear. And like you said, fear we maybe haven't quite gotten used to, but a fear, yeah, is my school going to be closed? Am I going to be quarantined? Am I going to keep mom and dad out of work? Who's going to take care of me? I'm now, 10. Do I get to stay by myself? So lots of things going on. Heather, what about for you?
As I think about the impact in those areas you mentioned, socially, emotionally, and academically, I think there's a few things that came to mind right away for me. As I think about socially, some people are mentioning in the chat, students might be struggling to get along with their peers. And I think that's because they've done that now for so many months behind screens. And so now they're back in school. And before they had that safety of it's an icon on the screen, not my face. At least for my students. It was rare to see a face with distance learning. So it's hard to then be face-to-face with students again, and then to be middle schoolers on top of that and dealing with the hormones and the changes and the self-consciousness. So I think that's been a big impact that we've noticed, at least on my team. And I also think, tying into what Christine mentioned about that uncertainty of what model our students are using, they're going to be online or in person or hybrid. To me, that's led to students just craving structure but not realizing that's what they're craving, right? They need those routines, but they push back on it a little bit, because before they could just get up and go to the bathroom or get a snack, and do that as they wanted to or needed to. And now we have to think about, how do we change that when we're in the classroom, because it's different when we're back at school. So for me, those are the two big things that came to mind, and are, I don't want to say obstacles, but challenges and opportunities for growth as an educator, to think about, what can I do differently to support my students, knowing we've all experienced this collective trigger and form of trauma, so that we can all be successful together.
So it sounds like how that just even that empathy and understanding that we're all in this together, and both of you are saying that same thing, those strong routines are always really, really important to keep the kids feeling safe in a time where they might be experiencing fear, but also it brings that predictability, which again, just helps the learning not have to be something that's that much of a challenge. And Linda, how about over in California? What have you been doing? Or what have you been
So
noticing?
I think about every school year, almost regardless of its setting. It's like childbirth. I was telling somebody, I said, I forget how hard it is until I have to do it again. So this year, what I've noticed, I think more than anything else, is so much talking. And when I sit back and reflect upon it, it's that need for not so much the voice, I think, can be seen. I think it's the need to be known. It's like they existed, they were known in such a small space for the previous 18 months that all of a sudden we have to know them. And so it has caused me, because I have the ability to do this, standards, we all have standards and they're hanging over our head. I gave myself the gift, and I gave them the gift of really connecting with them that first month. Yeah, we'll do some reading. Yeah, we'll do some mini lessons, but really it's just us. And I feel like it has given us the ability to really forego some of the conflicts that I would have normally seen. Are they there? Absolutely. Do we now know each other as a community well enough to sit and have conflict resolutions? Absolutely. And it's really something that was an aha moment. And I want to really applaud Christine and Heather for talking about those routines and focusing on them, because that's something, you get into that rut, right? About, I taught that routine. And then you forget, why are they talking so much? Because I have to go back and teach it again. It's not a one and done. Nothing is in this world. So why should any of those interactive modeling routines? And I was just walking them out today, and I'm going, I gave my perfect teacher language. I did all these things right, and yet they're still not doing it. And so it's giving them the model of the humility and the vulnerability of saying, well, you know what? That was an epic fail. What we're going to do when we come back on Friday, I'm realizing that, you own it the same way you want them to do it. And we are going to come through and really talk about some of these routines again. Because what I've really done is given them, so much choice has been taken away from them in these past 2 years, that I want them to have the agency this age is known to really foster and excel in. So as much choice as we can. What kind of greetings are we going to use? Let's see what works for you. A lot of check-ins with them, a lot of movement, things that, yes, they had that ability to go to the bathroom whenever they wanted to now. So keep that movement going, give them agency, and then really listen to them, because for so long they may have felt like they weren't heard. This is a space where they can be.
It's interesting because you kind of all have that same version of the same story. And I'm just going to wrap up this question in saying that middle school educators have a unique experience where you don't usually have your same class all day long. And hopefully you have them at least once a day during that time. And when we're talking about kids with trauma or toxic stress, that the biggest indicator of success for resilience for students who experience trauma or toxic stress is a significant relationship with at least one adult. So no matter what role you have, even if you're an educator for kids last year and they pop in your room all the time and want to see you because they missed that in-person time, you might be that one person. So taking that time to really connect, and it doesn't take a lot of time, but being positive. So we've had that focus about closing the academic gap that's been out there. You know, the word learning loss was publicized throughout the work that we've done. And one of the things is I know it's real, that pressure to close some of those academic gaps. How have you adjusted your teaching to adjust to these unique learner needs that you have right now, the social emotional needs, the academic needs that are there? And Heather, we'll start with you.
Awesome, thanks. So as I think about the students that I'm seeing in front of me, the first thing I've noticed is that I am slowing way down, right? I'm not stressing about getting to as many of those standards you mentioned, Margie, but giving myself and my students the grace to slow down and to dig deeper and to be more responsive in my planning and my teaching. I normally love to have things really planned out, and I'm boop, 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 here's what I'm doing. And I'm noticing that this year I'm doing a lot of last minute planning because that's what my students need me to do. So it's, hey, how far did we get yesterday? It's okay, I didn't finish the lesson, because instead I took time to connect with some of my students who really needed that connection. And so I don't feel as pressured to get through things as quickly. And I also think that I am trying to give myself grace to flop on a lesson and try new things. We all taught in a completely different way for those of us that taught from home. And so how do I have that mindset of, hey, I was trying completely new things for a year and it worked, right? I had students who were engaged and present. So how do I continue that in my classroom in person? And I took some time with my students and we talked about, there was a lesson I saw online about Kobe Bryant and how he missed a huge percent of the shots that he took over his career. It was like 50% of his certain kind of shots. I'm not a sports person, but I use the analogy because my students are. And missed, internet unstable, missed a bunch of these shots, but still one of the greatest players of all time. So I can have a lesson that doesn't work and I can still be a good teacher because I still took time to make connections with my students and to help them make connections with each other. So I think it's thinking about how we don't have to get as far as we thought in the past, that we can be creative in how we're teaching students now, and that it's okay for us to try new things, even when they don't work, because we know that we're doing it for the students and trying to meet them where they're at.
Thank you for the idea of giving yourself grace, and sometimes getting that grace from another colleague or from your supervisor or your principal is another beautiful way to feel that. I've got one more quote for you, Heather. I'm not a basketball person either, but the other one I always say is Michael Jordan always said, I've always learned more from every shot I missed than any shot I ever made. So yeah, we learn from those mistakes. So giving, and kids like those sports analogies. So if they can see two heroes that have, succeeded well, basically celebrate the mistakes they've made as well. And how about Linda? Tell us about how you have adjusted your teaching.
Well, I have another quote then for you, Heather, and everybody is, I read this quote recently about Nelson Mandela, who said, I never fail. I either succeed or I learn. And so, my class this year is knowing Miss Berger as being, did I ever tell you the story about blank? I'm totally talking about them. They don't know that because, of course, it's about somebody else. So I tend to pull people that would be meaningful examples to them. And what I've really done is, yes, we have to keep them involved in their learning with engaging academics, but I'm a half full person. And growth mindset is very big in our district. And I really do have the gift of having a district that is embracing project-based learning. I included some of these stories in the book too. And the beauty of that is we can take some of their interests and really involve them in a real integrated project. It's more than integrated projects. It's a real life learning target. So we just started a vote for design So we went back to the voting concept and really what's important to you in a person. We know it's a total social emotional learning lesson. However, we managed to integrate a lot of different things. And if you were a US president, how would you respond to this pandemic, and using the qualities that you've identified are important to you? All these things, we make sure that have a real life connection to them. And really, it's become my passion over the past several years. Therefore, I get to pass on that passion to them. And I feel like this age, we give them the agency, but we also tell them what's important and how their voice can really affect the rest of the world. And I think those two things, once they realize this pandemic, rather than being trauma related, it gave you the gift of a larger awareness to the world. So we really play what I call the long game in our classroom, and I want them to see the value of those real life skills too.
It's interesting how you shared that, Linda, because there is that reality that they're experiencing a historical event that will be remembered for eons, and learning from that and taking those same social emotional learning skills or academic skills and tying it to an event that is very tied emotionally is powerful. Christine, how about you? How have you responded with academics with your students?
Well, I don't have a quote to share. I kind of feel like I should have had one. And I have like nothing, because maybe it's the end of the day, right? And our brain tends to get a little different at the end of the day. But I find it's this whole way of teaching, I find, is like a big ironic joke. Right before the pandemic started, my staff started in on a book study about blended learning. And then we jump into virtual learning, and wow. So I think, like, you know what? Somebody's having a good laugh about that. However, I will say that throughout this time, I've always been a big advocate of helping my students identify their learning styles, but I didn't really necessarily do a specific job with that. And being a reading interventionist and having my students at home, most of them didn't have books. And so giving them those options, like, okay, you're watching anime, read the subtitles. Here's the link to an audiobook. Go ahead and listen to this audiobook. Bluford.org is a great series that is realistic urban fiction, where there's stories about children that live in urban settings, and they deal with situations that all children, no matter what setting they're in, and they get to hear those stories. And if they wanted to go to the library and check out a copy, they could listen and follow along. And so interesting, I had so many students over the past year and a half say to me, I always thought I didn't like reading. I just don't like looking at a page on a book, but I love reading subtitles. Like when I watch TV now, I turn the volume off and I just do subtitles for everything. Or, you know what? I actually understand a book better when I listen to it. And so it's those things that just kind of happened on accident that really made a big difference. And being, as we were learning about blended learning, different applications that we could use, like Loom video, where I could record a lesson and then post that so that students who weren't able to log on at that time still had that opportunity to log in. And I was able to continue doing that when we went back in person for students who were absent. And then recognizing there's certain types of lessons that my students had a voice, and they're like, you know what? Instead of doing whole group vocabulary, can we just do it where we watch the video and interact with our textbook, and then we come back and we play a vocabulary game? And so now they're having a say in their learning that never would have happened if this pandemic didn't happen, because I wouldn't have been pushed to try these new technologies and be purposeful in not overloading my students with them or myself, and really being kind of thoughtful and mindful about how and when I'm using them.
It's interesting because as challenging as the pandemic's been, is presented some opportunities. And it sounds like all three of you embraced some of those opportunities, and I know are continuing to embrace those opportunities. I'm going to ask our participants now, and I'm just going to make this by choice, but what have you done in a one sentence summary? So if you know that interactive learning structure is just writing one sentence, what have you done to adjust to the challenges and the changes in academics? Add those to the chat, and we're going to just get a chance to look at what you've added, and we'll summarize those for anybody who's on the other end that may not see all these. And all giving yourself permission to slow down. Yes, and Jerry also. Daniel, it's so important, yep, to prioritize.
I just thought of a quote.
Yes, good.
I don't know who said it. It was a football coach. I'm a football fan, but we need to go slow to go fast.
Yep, absolutely. And we can't go fast with this work unless we do go slow, especially now. Yep. And, you know, it's been difficult building those connections, but that's what students need, and that collaboration.
And I would say, you know, even ask for forgiveness rather than permission sometimes with the administration, school site administration and district administration for me, because yes, if we see that need, since we're the experts of our classroom and veterans with these students, not to have those standards, like I mentioned, hanging over our heads and waiting to drop. We need to make them, I always say responsive classroom, it helps us foster better people. And learning is the short game in some ways. Better people is the long game. And, you know, that's a gift for them that I'd like to see keeps on giving.
And again, thank you for sharing everything that you've been able to in the chat. I know it's evening time and you're like, probably just want to sit back and watch, but thank you for taking the time to do that. And again, slowing down and interactive modeling is powerful. I just want to add one more caveat to what Christine had shared is, I would say change in education is like trying to turn an ocean liner. You know how slow it goes because everybody has to be on board with the change. And a lot of innovative educators like Linda, you're kind of saying, you're kind of like the tugboat, like, I'm going to go this way. Well, that didn't work. I'm going to go this way. And a lot of you joining tonight are kind of that way. But we learn, just like Heather said too, as much from our mistakes as we do what's right. But when it came to the pandemic, we had to make a quick turn. All of us did at the same time. So not only has this been stressful for kids, but extremely stressful for adults as well. So thank you for joining in with your comments. So I want you to think about the question that I want to ask you right now, team, is how have you balanced that pressure to fill those gaps in academics with that need to build that community and teach those social emotional skills? You shared with us a lot of what you've done to kind of help give yourself grace or take the time for academics, but how has that worked for that balance? Christine, if you'd start.
Yeah, sure. So using the structure of a responsive advisory meeting and really standing outside my door at the arrival and saying hello to each person and making sure that I have the correct pronunciation of their name and having them correct me when I'm not right. It's been definitely challenging with seeing half of a face on some students and then a full face on others to learn those names, but taking that time and then also adding one other part of that component of the RAM to the beginning of my classroom settings has been really helpful. So a lot of times I will do an acknowledgement where our students will have an opportunity to practice using a format, whether it be a think, pair, share, or a table talk that we're going to use later on academically. So we might begin with a table talk where the order is going to be the sum of the last two digits of your phone number from lowest to highest. And then they might share a highlight from their week that could be at school or at home. And they now have practiced that in the beginning, using non-threatening, and they've built that community with each other. And then later on in the class, we'll go ahead and use the same structure of table talk. And I might say, this time we'll go alphabetical by the third letter of your first name. And let's go ahead now and share about the characters that we're reading in our book and one trait along with something that you have as proof about that trait. And so by using the responsive advisory components to practice those academic skills, while also using some cooperation and self-control as they build community, has really kind of made a difference in meeting those needs for belonging and significance, and then also giving them the strategies and the structures in place for the rigor of the academics.
So a middle school approach in responsive classroom is at advisory time. Ideally at the beginning of the day, but anytime that you can build it in, ideally daily, but again, when you can build it in. And even more so during the pandemic, it's been so needed. And what you're saying, I hear, Christine, is that you're connecting those academics with those 4 components of advisory, which is a beautiful way to have kids see that there's a reality to everything we do from the very beginning of the day or whenever you're connecting with RAM. Heather, how about you?
I would echo what Christine said about using components of advisory meeting in your class. It's one of my favorite things is to stand at the door. I feel like it's a good gauge and pulse on how the students are feeling based on how they enter your space. Is their head up? Is their head down? Do they say hello? Do they not? And it's a good just gauge for how I'm starting class. So I agree. That's one of my favorites. I also would say I use a lot of brain breaks. We have great resources online and there's a book available too in the store, but throwing in those quick games where students are interacting with one another allows me to meet that social emotional need without taking up a ton of time from my content when I feel like I do need to get through something that day. You do need to get through a certain note or test or whatever it may be, right? Hey, let's pause. Let's do a quick brain break just to reset our brains, to get our brains moving and thinking and active again before we continue on. And then as a former reading teacher, I thought of the Lorax as you were talking about how do we balance the pressure piece. And so the Lorax speaks for the trees. I speak for my students. And so as we think about this year, it is about the students. It's not about me. It's not about my administration or the standards I have to cover or my content, but it's about the students in front of me. So what is it that they need? And if that means I need to push back on admin, giving, something that we need to do in the classroom. Nope, I need time. My students need to socialize. We're going to take a day for community building. And I think that's okay because Linda mentioned earlier, we are the experts in our classroom, right? We know our students and we're taking the time to foster and build those relationships. And so how do you honor those relationships you're building with your students? By advocating for them. They don't always see that you're doing it, but I think that's a key piece for us this year is just thinking about how do we speak for the students like the Lorax speaks for the trees. So.
All right, I'm gonna steal that idea. That's a great idea. And I don't think of the Lorax as being that book that could tell them that, but yeah, we want them to have that agency and that's what they have the ability to do. So Linda, how about you? What have you done to kind of keep that pressure that's real there, but also build in social emotional learning?
So I love that Christine and Heather both gave me pieces to build on. With Heather, yes, that I was surprised when I presented to middle schools this summer, how I would be talking about RAM and they'd be going, what? Nobody had advisory. They didn't have the time. Everything was built out. And I was saying exactly that. Find what you can do. If it's a greeting, do that. I mean, that's going to be the one time that they may have heard their name in a positive way that day. So be that person for them. The other thing is when you have those brain books, how can you mix it? How can you make it an interactive learning structure? I mean, how can you build on something academic? Because building on something Christine said, one of the things that was really this aha moment for me at the beginning of the summer was making sure with all the not just the pandemic. There's all sorts of drama that so many of our students have been experiencing just in being known and being seen. So I've become, again, passionate about making sure that the materials that I use, oh, I know that the units of study, they use this book. Well, I'm going to use this book because this has characters that look like my students. This has characters with experiences that resonate with them. So, having the sports analogy, find what is lights their fire this year and find something that reflects that, because the voices that they hear from these resources are going to be much more meaningful than, I said it in a different way before, but let me just say, because when we have these honest conversations with the students, a lot of times these nuggets of gold will come out of them, and it's important to give them that agency and show them why this material matters to them. And a lot of times we can do that with the first person resources and really make history come alive for them, make the writing come alive, and make the material jump off their page. Because Jason Reynolds has really been a fabulous resource to me. He loves children. He really loves them. And once the children know he loves them, he has all sorts of nuggets and materials that have been instrumental in us taking culturally responsive teaching to new heights and new levels with the students and making that learning much more meaningful to them.
And I'd like to add on to what Heather was sharing about brain breaks. And throughout this whole pandemic, there's been a real move to mindfulness and gratitude. And so thinking about what mindfulness breathing activity can I use with my students as a brain break when I see that they've gotten on the struggle bus and now it's going to turn into, I can't do this. So can we teach them, an energizer like 4-4-4 breathing, where they do 4 rounds of breathing into 4, hold to 4, exhale to 4. So, using our brain breaks more purposefully to really meet our students where they're at in their development and where they're at with how we are as a society.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to link in the Brain Breaks book as well. Again, these are not resources that you have to purchase, but know that they're written by colleagues of ours in this work who are in classrooms as well. And sometimes just knowing that you can have that accessibility. I've kind of found that same thing with students and even with adults right now, that when we think of brain breaks, we sometimes think they have to be that energetic things, and really teaching some of those calming and mindful and breathing techniques are life-changing, because they can usually do them anywhere. It doesn't have to be a video that you have to watch or a card you have to read. You can do them at any place. So many of you have shared with me in my work with each of you that you found technology tools to help kind of reimagine learning. And I want to start with Christine on this one. Christine, what have you done to take technology to that next level with your students, that some of it you put in place because of the pandemic?
So as I was saying, we had begun looking at blended learning. So I had already previewed some things that I wanted to use. And then our district gave us a whole bunch, and there was a whole bunch that I'm like, no way, never, not me. But I would say the 2 that really kind of applications that really helped me be that best teacher for my students where they're at right now would be Padlet. I love using interactive learning structures where students get up and move around. And so like graffiti, where there would be like a chart, different charts, and students would go and write on those charts. That just wasn't really feasible. And so using Padlet and having prompts, and then the students could go ahead and add their ideas. Wow, I've always thought I was really good at making relationships with my students, but I know so much more about them based on these Padlets, because they're sharing things, whether it's personal or academic, and students get to be known and they become significant. Last year, I was blown away by one student who was able to make a Jimmy Neutron reference to, I want to say 90% of the Padlet posts. The other piece that's really made a difference for me, I've always been, teacher language has been like one of my practices that I really focus on. And I often forget about reinforcing language, but I found this app called Mote, M-O-T-E, that allows you, if you're using Google Classroom, to have 30 seconds to record yourself, and then it transcribes it to text. So it really made a huge difference for me in honing in my reinforcing language. So good readers are able to use text details to support their ideas. You said the setting is taking place during Halloween, and you proved that by showing in the book that the characters were wearing costumes, which has translated into my students having that achievement gap, that learning loss that we're all so afraid of, really kind of go away, because now they know specifically what they've done well, so they can continue to do that.
I have to say I was a benefit of learning from Padlet from Christine in a summer workshop, and it was so easy to learn, and I'm not always an easy learner, that I was able to incorporate it. So that was a good thing. Heather, how about you with a technology that you would have added in your social studies class?
So one of them that we started using a lot last year was called Flipgrid, where students can record a video of themselves. And we used it for introductions at the beginning of the year, but we also used it as an alternative for testing. So rather than writing out your test response to a question that's open-ended, just record a video of yourself telling me about it. And I found that for a lot of my students who struggle putting their thoughts on paper or putting their thoughts in a Word document, that really made a big difference for them and opened up another avenue, another on-ramp to the learning that was happening. So that's something that I've continued to use this year, and offering that opportunity during tests to record some of their responses using that Flipgrid instead. And our school has also been using Flipgrid as a way to recognize student success. So we record videos for different award things that we can talk about in their success, just showing them how that tool works. And then I would also say that to keep it, I don't know, basic isn't the right word, but not having a fancy app to use, I really enjoyed the Google Suites. If your school has Google Docs, we found that we used extension boards. So we would just make a Google slideshow. It was one slide, and we would give kids opportunities to play or create or watch. And so we could link different things to different documents or to different websites or to different activity directions. Christine mentioned Loom. We recorded Loom videos with directions or extra instruction, where students could choose, what is it that I need in this moment for my own learning? And so we were able to use some of those Google Sheets and Docs and slideshows in new ways that we just had never thought of before. So it's been really fun to rethink how we do some of those sort of extension activities or self-paced learning, where students can work their way through something on their own. And being able to just keep that in your classroom and apply that has been really beneficial.
It's exciting to hear the different formats that you're using. And I also think that what an opportunity for students to get these new tools, that some of them have been there, but they've become created easier for them to use, and easier for us as educators. So way to go. And how about you, Linda? What have you been using how have you been using technology with your students?
So I kind of want to jump off on something Lisa wrote in the chat about brain breaks, and yes, how it can easily be tilting up. The thing that we do with technology is when we work so hard to develop that community, there's a Google version of Padlet called Jamboard. So Jamboard is very similar. And when we use something like Google Suites, or even Seesaw is another app that we use, we'll post our work, we'll celebrate it. Part of project-based learning is celebrating your work. And then we will equitably comment on each other's work. And part of the way that we set up things, Lisa, like brain breaks or commenting, is just being very explicit about what you do and how you do it. And beauty of Seesaw too, truth be told, is I have the approval content. My finger's on the button. So if it's something that's not it just doesn't get done. But it's a way to develop that community in an academic way, using technology while trying to kind of wean them off of it because it's been such a big part of their lives. Or it makes me think of the beauty of that is because then their academics are grown, their community is maintained, and they really realize what they can do, and they see their capabilities of it, and see these things that are strengths, while also knowing that the human touch can always be supported in positive and productive ways.
It was beautiful how you responded. I didn't see Lisa's comment there, but yeah, exactly, that there's so many connections we can make with the students through some of those, even for those calming activities. I'm going to do another interaction with our attendees again. If you can share in the chat any new or different technology tools that you have used to reimagine learning. And maybe they're the same ones you heard about just now, and you might just put another caveat at it and just add a little bit more detail to it. But how has technology helped you reimagine middle school students?
One of my favorite things about Padlet is the ability to add images or GIFs, whatever you want to say. And what a great way to give students voice and then find out who the other Office fans are in your class so that you get that extra connection with them.
I saw Katie wrote something that I have been using, and I remember being a little sheepish about admitting it to responsive classroom colleagues, Heather, when we were working on the book. And I said, there's something called Dino, where I can get a mirrored screen so I can see what they're doing. And I said the power of the block. Nope, block. But it also gives me the ability to counsel them at the same time, because we can send them private messages and it will broadcast on their screen. So realizing that can be used for evil and it can be used for good, and finding that balance at the time that they need it most is really important.
You know, one of the things that made me think of is all three of you shared, and our audience that's sharing here as well, is that by middle school, we kind of expect that students have I don't know what to call it, but the tech hygiene health as they start using those tools. But they've used it so much independently. And one of the things I hear from middle school educators is it's been used so much for some of the connections with each other in a negative way, that these small tools give us an opportunity to teach some of that etiquette, I guess, for use of technology, but also use of social media. So even if it is, the block, it helps kids develop that empathy for each other as well. So hopefully you get a chance to see some of these. Again, Flipgrid, Desmos, NetTop, lots of ideas of how you can use technology as well. Well, we're going to wrap up with one last question. And while you've made these changes due to COVID, these three amazing teachers, which are the changes that you've made in these last 20 months are you prioritizing to carry forward? So hopefully when things return to normal, what's something that you want to prioritize to kind of be part of your repertoire of what you do? And Linda, I'm going to start with you.
I think when I step back and I reflect on this year, just already, I'm thinking, checking in with them more. And making those, my favorite word, they haven't gotten sick of it yet, but Silicon Valley here, we use the word pivot all the time. Well, we had to change that really quick. We're going to pivot. So pivoting and doing it based on what, not so much the direction that they want, but the direction that they need. And being transparent about what worked and why we're making those changes. It's adding that layer of why. to bring that significance that Christine mentioned, not only to them personally, but to their learning and their opinion, knowing that they have a voice in the direction their education goes, because that's a life skill that will continue on.
Okay, I got another aha just listening to you, but it made me think of, as we're preparing kids for their future careers or jobs that they do, that ability to be flexible in a challenge is really important. And sometimes we lay things out so much in step that we haven't taught them that ability to pivot. So yeah, that way, that the why is so important. I appreciate that, Katie, that you shared that as well. And also, how about Heather? Heather, what's one thing you want to carry forward?
I first have to chuckle every time, Linda, I hear the word pivot. I think of Friends, pivot from the couch scene, if anyone else, every time. No, so good, Margie. As I think about things that I want to keep, Lisa's with me in the chat. Awesome. I think about how really over the last year, I've started to focus more on connection over direction. So how am I connecting with my students rather than standing in front of the room and teaching or doing these activities? And kind of tying into what Margie and Linda are saying, thinking about the skills over my particular content. So how are we being critical thinkers about, for history class, right, the American Revolution versus knowing the dates and the exact people that were involved. And I also think this has been a unique opportunity to reinforce best practices as educators, and that it really has re-emphasized the importance of knowing our students and thinking about them as kids, right? So someone had mentioned misbehavior. It's happening this year, right? It's happening, and we have to just acknowledge that we're seeing some changes in behavior. So thinking about what's the function of that student's behavior, remembering back to best practice and thinking about being responsive developmentally to our students. And as I think about having them be engaged in the learning, it's about offering them choices, which Linda mentioned earlier. How can I give them the option to read or to watch a video or to talk to a neighbor or write a response on an exit ticket? So I really think, in addition to kind of changing the way we're thinking, it's also brought us as educators back to what we know to be best practices for the students in our classroom.
So you've pivoted, and I guess I have to watch the Friends episode to see. And Christine, how about you?
So teacher language has always been the practice that is my best friend and my worst enemy. Some days I'm like, ooh, yeah, girl, you've got this. And other days I'm like, oh, what did I say? What did I do? And I've really seen the importance and the power of using my reminding language to reference anchor charts, to reference our rules, to reference examples, because they already know that. And because their hormones might be turned on that day, they've forgotten. And so if I'm using my reminding language, I'm really setting them up for success, and I'm helping myself stay happy. Reinforcing language, as I said, I developed that passion by using MOTE, and it really helped me to be specific in giving feedback, whether it be academic or whether it be around like how they're taking care of each other, even growing and becoming that best version of themselves. And now I really want to be thinking about really using that envisioning language as I couple it with that growth mindset, really helping my students kind of see where they were, where they are, and where they can go, and reminding them the power of that 3-letter word, yet. So I can't do that. Remember, I can't do that yet. And when I can, this is what I'll be able to see myself doing. So I'd say my teacher language, just a pivot in how I've been using it in the past, in being more intentional and purposeful to meet the needs of my students, where they're at socially and emotionally, and even academically.
Well, I can't thank all of you enough. I know we've reached the end of our time, and I just want to celebrate all 3 of our panelists tonight in their ability to stay on late, stay after school, keep the dog quiet, and anything else that you needed to do to be here. But I also really want to thank all of you that attended tonight. If we we wouldn't do this if it wasn't for you. And because of you, Responsive Classroom is getting better every day. So if you haven't looked at our resources for a while, I've shared many of them with you. We have a number of middle school resources. These are a few of them. One of the last ones over here on the right, and I'll just put it quick in the chat, is what we call a quick coaching guide. It's short professional development that you could use with all of your staff. If you're a leader or a coach, but you could buy one copy yourself. And it just gives you one thing to work on because you can't do it all. As we wrap up tonight, know you'll get a copy of this in your mail email. And thank you again to our panelists, and thank you for our attendees. Have a great rest of your evening and a great rest of your week. Thanks for coming. And just, I'd promised to answer any questions in the Q&A. There were none. So I guess our facilitators and panelists took care of answering all those, or you're just tired, which is also understandable. So I'm going to log off right now, panelists, so you can take care of yourselves. And again, thank you for everybody that attended. There are no discounts for attending this webinar, but if you go on our website and you sign up for our emails, you sign up and you get a discount. So make sure if you take a look right away, and you want to get our emails, because that's how you stay connected. But yes, so there's not any connected tonight, but do that as well. So again, thank you, everybody. Any last questions? Otherwise, we're going to wrap up for the evening.